Maya Thompson was 12 years old, and if you asked anyone who knew her, they'd tell you the same thing. That girl lived and breathed piano. Every morning before school, she'd wake up at 6 just to practice for an hour. Her fingers would fly across those black and white keys like they were telling stories only she could hear. And right now, she was preparing for the biggest moment of her young life. The Winston Academy Spring Concert wasn't just any school event. This was the concert that parents circled on their calendars months in advance. Local newspapers sent reporters. Sometimes even talent scouts showed up, looking for the next young prodigy to feature in their programs. For a kid like Maya, getting a solo spot at this concert was like winning the lottery. She'd been chosen to perform Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Now, if you don't know classical music, just know this piece is beautiful, but incredibly difficult. It requires both hands to work in perfect harmony, creating this dreamy, flowing sound that makes you feel like you're floating. Maya had spent 6 whole months preparing this piece. 6 months of daily practice, of sore fingers, of playing the same measures over and over until they were absolutely perfect. Her piano teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez from the community center, had told her she was ready. Her parents had already invited all their relatives. Maya's grandmother had even bought a new dress just for the occasion. Everything was falling into place exactly as it should. It was a Tuesday afternoon in April, the kind of spring day where the weather can't quite make up its mind. One minute the sun would peek through the clouds, and the next minute you'd see dark storm clouds rolling in from the west. Maya's mom had picked her up from her after-school art club, and they were driving home, talking about what Maya wanted for dinner. They were stopped at a red light on Maple Street just 3 blocks from their house. Maya was looking out the window, watching raindrops start to dot the glass when her mother said something about stopping by the grocery store. Maya was about to answer when she heard it. That terrible screech of tires trying desperately to stop on wet pavement. Her mother's head whipped around, her eyes going wide. She tried to say something, maybe tried to swerve, but there wasn't time. The other car, a large SUV that had run straight through the red light, crashed into the passenger side of their sedan with a sickening crunch of metal and shattering glass. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion and at lightning speed all at once. Maya felt herself thrown sideways against the seatbelt. Her right arm, which had been resting on the door's armrest, took the full force of the impact. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, shooting up from her wrist all the way to her shoulder. She heard herself screaming, heard her mother crying out her name, heard sirens in the distance that seemed both too far away and too loud at the same time. The paramedics arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours to Maya. They were gentle but efficient, carefully extracting her from the crumpled car, while asking her questions she could barely process. What's your name? How old are you? Can you move your fingers? That last question made her try, and the spike of pain that followed made her cry out again. At the hospital, everything became a blur of bright lights and worried faces. Doctors examined her arm carefully, their expressions serious. Her mother held her left hand so tightly that Maya could feel her trembling. The X-rays showed what everyone had feared. Maya's right radius was fractured in 2 places, and there was damage to the surrounding tissue. She'd need surgery to set the bones properly with pins, followed by a cast that would immobilize her entire forearm and wrist. The orthopedic surgeon, a kind woman with gray streaks in her hair, explained everything in a gentle voice, but Maya barely heard the medical details. All she could focus on was one single sentence that kept echoing in her mind. 8 to 10 weeks for full healing. 8 to 10 weeks before the cast could come off. 8 to 10 weeks. The concert was in 6 weeks. After the surgery, Maya lay in the hospital bed staring at her right arm. It was wrapped in layers of white plaster from just below her elbow all the way past her wrist, with only her fingers peeking out at the end. Those fingers looked strange and useless, slightly swollen and unable to move properly. She tried to wiggle them, hoping somehow the doctors were wrong, but even that small movement sent pain shooting through her arm. Her mother sat beside her, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words. Her father had rushed over from work and stood at the foot of the bed, his face tight with worry and anger at the driver who had caused all this. But Maya barely registered their presence. All she could think about was the piano. All those months of practice, all those early mornings and late nights, all those dreams of standing on that stage under the spotlight, sharing her music with everyone. Gone. All of it, just gone. The tears came then hot and heavy, streaming down her face faster than she could wipe them away. These weren't tears of physical pain. though her arm still throbbed despite the medication. These were tears of heartbreak, of dreams shattered as completely as her bones had been. Her mother pulled her close, careful not to jostle the injured arm, and let her cry. That night, alone in her hospital room after her parents had reluctantly gone home to get some rest, Maya stared at the ceiling tiles and tried to imagine her future. The concert would go on without her, of course. Someone else would play her piece, or maybe they'd just remove it from the program entirely. She imagined her empty spot on the stage, the program with her name crossed out, her classmates whispering about the accident. She imagined sitting in the audience instead of performing, having to watch others live out the dream that had been stolen from her. The worst part wasn't just missing this one concert, though that hurt terribly. The worst part was the fear that crept in during those dark hours. What if her arm didn't heal properly? What if she lost some of her dexterity, some of that fluid movement that made her playing special? What if this accident didn't just steal one performance but damaged her future as a pianist forever? She looked at her left hand, resting on top of the thin hospital blanket. It seemed strange and lonely without its partner. Piano required both hands working together, creating harmony and melody, supporting and complementing each other. What good was one hand alone? It was like trying to clap with one hand, or trying to tie your shoes with one hand, or trying to do anything that required both parts to make a whole. As sleep finally pulled her under, exhausted from pain and crying and fear, Maya's last thought was simple and devastating. Her dream was over before it had really begun, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. Maya spent 5 days in the hospital before the doctors finally cleared her to go home. Those 5 days felt like 5 years. The pain medication made her drowsy and foggy, but every time she woke up, reality hit her all over again. The cast was real. The accident was real, and the concert that she'd miss was very, very real. Her friends from school had sent cards and videos, all saying they hoped she'd feel better soon, but Maya couldn't bring herself to watch most of them. She knew they meant well, but their sympathy only reminded her of everything she'd lost. When her mother suggested she might want to video chat with some of her classmates, Maya just shook her head and turned toward the wall. The following Monday, Maya's parents decided she was well enough to return to school. Physically, she was healing okay. The surgery had gone smoothly, and the doctors were pleased with how the bones were setting. But emotionally, Maya felt like she was barely holding it together. Still, staying home and staring at her cast wasn't helping anything, so she agreed to go back. Walking through the halls of Winston Academy felt different now. Students she barely knew gave her sympathetic looks or asked about her arm. Some of the younger kids stared at her cast with wide eyes like it was some kind of exotic creature. Maya tried to smile and say she was fine, but the words felt hollow in her mouth. She wasn't fine. Not even close. The hardest part of the day was orchestra class. It was her last period, which meant she had all day to dread it. When the bell finally rang, Maya walked slowly to the music room, her stomach twisted in knots. She could hear scales and warm-up exercises through the door, the familiar sounds that used to bring her joy now just making her feel worse. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room went quiet for a moment as everyone turned to look at her. Then her friend Jennifer rushed over, giving her a careful hug that avoided her injured arm. A few other students welcomed her back, their faces genuinely happy to see her. For just a second, Maya felt a tiny bit better. Then Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore walked in. Mrs. Whitmore was the head of the music department at Winston Academy. She'd been teaching there for almost 20 years, and she ran her program with an iron fist. She was known for being strict and demanding, pushing her students to achieve excellence. But there was something else about her too, something that Maya and a few other students had picked up on over the years. The way she seemed to favor certain students over others, the way her compliments always seemed to go to the same faces, the way she'd sometimes make comments that felt wrong, even if you couldn't quite put your finger on why. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes landed on Maya, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She walked to the front of the room, set down her leather bag, and clasped her hands together. The room fell completely silent. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. "Well, Miss Thompson," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice carrying across the room, "I see you've decided to grace us with your presence." Maya felt her cheeks start to burn. There was something in the teacher's tone that wasn't quite welcoming. Something cold. "Yes, ma'am," Maya said quietly. "The doctor said I could come back to school." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes moved deliberately to Maya's cast, and she made a small sound in her throat. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it wasn't sympathetic either. "I suppose this saves me the trouble of wondering whether you'd embarrass us at the spring concert." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Several students gasped. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. Maya felt like she'd been slapped across the face. She stood frozen, unable to believe what she'd just heard. Had Mrs. Whitmore really just said that? Out loud, in front of everyone? But the teacher wasn't done. She turned to address the entire class now, as if she were giving a lecture on music theory instead of destroying a 12-year-old's heart. The spring concert is the most important event of our year. It represents Winston Academy's commitment to excellence in the arts. Every performer must be at their absolute best. She turned back to Maya, and there was something in her eyes that made Maya's blood run cold. Perhaps this accident is nature's way of telling certain students that they should focus on more suitable activities. The piano requires dedication, discipline, and natural talent, and clearly, not everyone is cut out for the pressure of a high-stakes performance. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Maya felt tears starting to sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of everyone, not in front of this horrible woman who was supposed to be her teacher. But Mrs. Whitmore still wasn't finished. She walked over to her desk and picked up a clipboard, scanning it with an expression of fake thoughtfulness. "I think it would be best for everyone if you focus on something more manageable, Miss Thompson. I'm assigning you to program design duty for the concert. You can help create the pamphlets that we hand out to the audience. That seems much more appropriate for your current situation." Program design duty. It was what they gave to students who couldn't play instruments. Students who were in the class just to fill an arts requirement. Students who didn't really belong in the orchestra at all. Maya's friend Jennifer stood up from her seat, her face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Whitmore, that's not fair. Maya's been practicing for months. She's one of the best pianists we have. Just because she has a cast doesn't mean—" "Miss Chen," Mrs. Whitmore cut her off sharply, "I don't recall asking for your opinion. Unless you'd like to join Miss Thompson on program design duty, I suggest you sit down and prepare for rehearsal." Jennifer looked at Maya with helpless frustration, but she sat back down. There was nothing she could do. Mrs. Whitmore had all the power in this room, and everyone knew it. The rest of the class period was torture. Maya sat in the back corner, supposedly sketching ideas for the concert program, while the other students rehearsed their pieces. She had to listen to another student, a boy named Timothy, practice her Chopin nocturne. He was good, sure, but he rushed through the middle section and didn't quite nail the emotion of the piece. Maya's fingers itched to correct him, to show him how it should sound, but she couldn't. She was stuck on the sidelines, useless and humiliated. When the bell finally rang, Maya gathered her things quickly, desperate to escape. But as she headed for the door, she heard Mrs. Whitmore's voice behind her, low enough that only Maya could hear. "Perhaps now you'll understand that some dreams simply aren't meant for everyone, Miss Thompson. Better to learn that lesson now than to embarrass yourself later." Maya didn't trust herself to turn around. She didn't trust herself to speak. If she did, she might say something that would get her expelled or worse. So she just kept walking, her vision blurring with tears she could no longer hold back. She made it to the bathroom before the sobs came. Locked in a stall, Maya finally let herself cry the way she'd been holding back all period. She cried for the concert she'd miss. She cried for the humiliation she'd just endured. But most of all, she cried because Mrs. Whitmore's words had touched on her deepest fear, the one she'd been trying not to think about. What if the teacher was right? What if Maya really wasn't good enough? What if she'd been fooling herself all along? She stayed in that bathroom until the final bell rang and the school mostly emptied out. When she finally emerged, her eyes were red and puffy, but she didn't care anymore. She just wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and forget this entire horrible day had ever happened. That evening, Maya came home and went straight to her room without saying much to her parents. They'd asked how her first day back went, and she'd just mumbled, "Fine," before heading upstairs. She knew they were worried, but she couldn't talk about it yet. The humiliation was still too fresh, too raw. She sat on her bed for a while, just staring at the wall. Her room was filled with reminders of her musical life. Posters of famous pianists, sheet music stacked on her desk. A photo of her at last year's recital, beaming with pride after her performance. Everything in this room represented the person she thought she was, the person she'd been working so hard to become. Now it all just felt like a cruel joke. Eventually, she heard her mother call her down for dinner. Maya didn't want to eat, didn't want to face anyone, but she knew her parents would worry even more if she didn't come down. So she dragged herself downstairs and sat at the kitchen table, pushing food around her plate without really eating it. Her dad noticed immediately. He always did. "Rough day?" he asked gently. Maya shrugged, not trusting herself to speak without crying again. She'd already cried enough for one day. But her younger brother Daniel, who was 9 and didn't understand when to keep quiet, spoke up instead. "Did kids make fun of your cast? Because if they did, I'll tell them off, even if they're bigger than me." Despite everything, Maya felt a tiny smile tug at her lips. Her brother might be annoying sometimes, but he was fiercely loyal. "No, Danny, nothing like that." Her mother reached over and squeezed her good hand. "Honey, we know this is hard. Missing the concert, having to adjust to the cast. But you'll heal, and there will be other concerts. Next year you can—" "It's not just that, Mom," Maya said, her voice suddenly sharp. "Mrs. Whitmore basically told me in front of the whole class that I wasn't good enough. That the accident was a sign I shouldn't be playing piano at all. She said some people just aren't cut out for it." The kitchen went silent. Her father's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Her mother's face went through several emotions at once: shock, anger, disbelief. Even Daniel looked confused, like he couldn't understand why any teacher would say something so mean. "She said what?" her father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Maya repeated the story, and with each word she could see her parents getting angrier. Her dad wanted to call the school immediately. Her mom wanted to schedule a meeting with the principal first thing tomorrow. They were both talking over each other, making plans, discussing how to handle this situation, when Maya suddenly stood up from the table. "I need to be alone," she said, and before they could respond, she walked out of the kitchen. She found herself standing in the living room in front of their old upright piano. It wasn't anything fancy. Her parents had bought it used when she was 7 and first showed interest in music. The wood was scratched in places, and 2 of the keys stuck sometimes if you didn't hit them just right. But it was hers. It was where she'd learned to play, where she'd spent thousands of hours practicing, where she'd discovered that music was the language her soul spoke best. Now she stood in front of it like it was a stranger. Maya sat down on the bench slowly, carefully positioning herself so her cast wouldn't bump against anything. She stared at the keys, those familiar black and white patterns that she knew better than the back of her own hand. Well, the back of both her hands before one of them became useless. Without thinking too much about it, she placed her left hand on the lower keys, just rested it there, feeling the smooth ivory under her fingertips. Then, almost without meaning to, she pressed down on middle C. The note rang out clear and lonely in the quiet room. She pressed another key. Then another. Simple notes, nothing fancy, just her left hand moving slowly across the piano. It felt strange and incomplete, like trying to walk with only one leg. Every instinct in her body wanted her right hand to join in, to fill out the harmony, to complete the sound. But her right hand sat useless in its cast, and Maya felt fresh tears starting to build up again. Out of frustration, she slammed her left hand down on the keys, creating an ugly, discordant sound that matched exactly how she felt inside. "Hey, hey," her father's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him come in. "Don't hurt yourself. What does it matter?" Maya said bitterly. "I can't play anyway." "Not really. Not with one hand." "Piano isn't meant to be played with one hand, Dad. It's impossible." Her father sat down beside her on the bench. He wasn't musical himself. He always joked that he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but he'd always supported Maya's passion. He was quiet for a moment, then he pulled out his phone. "Hold on," he said, tapping and scrolling. "I want to show you something." "Dad, I really don't want to watch some inspirational video right now. Just look," he said, turning the phone toward her. On the screen was a black and white photograph of a man sitting at a piano. But something was different about the photo. The man only had one arm. "This is Paul Wittgenstein," her father said. "He was a concert pianist in the early 1900s. Lost his right arm in World War I. Everyone thought his career was over." Maya looked at the photo more closely. "What happened to him?" Her father smiled. "He didn't give up. Instead, he commissioned famous composers to write pieces specifically for the left hand alone. and he performed them all over the world. He had a whole career, Maya. A successful one. With one hand. Something stirred in Maya's chest, a tiny flicker of something that might have been hope. Wait, there's music written for just one hand? Like real music? Her father was already typing again. Let me see what I can find. Over the next hour, Maya discovered a whole world she never knew existed. Pieces composed specifically for the left hand. Some were written for injured soldiers like Wittgenstein. Others were written as technical exercises. But they were real compositions by real composers meant to be performed on real stages. There were pieces by Maurice Ravel, Alexander Scriabin, Benjamin Britten, and dozens of others. Some of them were incredibly complex, requiring the left hand to stretch across the entire keyboard, creating melodies and harmonies that seemed impossible for just 5 fingers. Maya watched video after video of pianists performing these pieces. She saw how their left hands flew across the keys, crossing over themselves, reaching for notes that seemed too far apart, creating music that sounded full and complete even though it was just one hand playing. "This is amazing," she whispered, watching a performance of Ravel's piano concerto for the left hand. "I had no idea this existed." Her mother had joined them now, sitting on the couch behind the piano, watching with interest. "Could you learn one of these pieces?" she asked. Maya's mind was already racing. She looked at the calendar on the wall. 6 weeks until the concert. Could she learn a completely new piece in 6 weeks? A piece that was probably much harder than anything she'd attempted before? With her non-dominant hand doing all the work? It seemed impossible. But then again, Mrs. Whitmore had basically said Maya was impossible, that she didn't belong, that some people just weren't meant for music. A spark of defiance ignited in Maya's chest. What if she proved everyone wrong? What if she showed up at that concert and performed anyway? Not with 2 hands like everyone expected, but with one hand playing music that most people didn't even know existed? "Find me the sheet music," Maya said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "I want to see what I can do." Her father grinned and started searching online. Within minutes, they'd found several pieces written for the left hand. Some were too advanced, clearly meant for professional concert pianists, but others, while still challenging, seemed possible. Maybe Maya's eyes landed on one piece in particular. Scriabin's Prelude and Nocturne for the left hand, Opus 9. It was beautiful, emotional, and technically demanding, but not impossible. The performance video she watched showed it was about the same length as the Chopin piece she'd been preparing. It would fit perfectly into the concert program. "This one," she said, pointing at the screen. "I want to learn this one." Her mother looked worried. "Honey, are you sure? You've been through so much already. And if Mrs. Whitmore has already taken you off the program—" "I don't care," Maya said, and she was surprised by how much she meant it. "Maybe I won't be able to perform at the concert. Maybe Mrs. Whitmore will find a way to stop me, but I need to try. I need to know if I can do this." Her father downloaded the sheet music and printed it out immediately. Maya took the pages carefully with her good hand, staring at the notes that covered the staff. It looked incredibly difficult. The left hand had to do everything. Melody, harmony, bass notes, all of it. There were sections where the hand had to jump across multiple octaves in seconds. Other sections required stretches that made her fingers ache just thinking about them. But as she sat back down at the piano and placed her left hand on the keys, Maya felt something she hadn't felt since the accident. She felt like a pianist again, like herself again. She started with just the first measure, one note at a time, slowly, carefully. Her left hand felt clumsy and uncertain, unused to carrying the entire musical load. But note by note, measure by measure, the piece began to take shape. Her family watched quietly as Maya worked through the first page. It would take weeks of intense practice. Her left hand would have to become stronger, more flexible, more independent than she'd ever trained it to be. But for the first time since the accident, Maya felt like she had a purpose again. Mrs. Whitmore had tried to break her spirit, had tried to convince her she didn't belong, that she wasn't good enough, that some dreams weren't meant for her. But sitting at that piano with her left hand finding its way through the music, Maya made herself a promise. She was going to prove everyone wrong. The next 3 weeks were the hardest Maya had ever worked in her life. She practiced before school during lunch in the empty music room when no one was around, and every evening until her mother had to physically drag her away from the piano to go to bed. Her left hand was building strength and dexterity she never knew was possible. But it came at a cost. Her fingers ached constantly and sometimes her wrist would throb from the strain. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. In orchestra class, Maya continued to sit in the back corner, supposedly working on concert program designs while everyone else rehearsed. Mrs. Whitmore largely ignored her now, which was almost worse than the open cruelty. At least when the teacher was being mean, Maya felt something. The indifference felt like she'd already been erased, like she didn't matter at all. Jennifer would sneak back during water breaks to check on her. "How's the secret project going?" she'd whisper. Maya had told only Jennifer about her plan to learn the one-handed piece. Her friend was the only person at school she trusted completely. "It's hard," Maya admitted. "Really hard, but I think I'm getting it." "Maybe." "You're going to blow everyone's minds," Jennifer said with fierce confidence. "I just know it," but Maya wasn't so sure. The piece was incredibly demanding. There were sections where her hand had to stretch across 9 keys, spanning more than an octave while simultaneously playing a melody with her thumb. Other parts required her hand to move so quickly across the keyboard that it felt like she was playing 2 different pianos at once. The worst part was that she couldn't practice at school during orchestra class without Mrs. Whitmore finding out. She'd tried once, slipping into one of the small practice rooms during her free period. But Mrs. Whitmore had somehow appeared, telling her coldly that the practice rooms were for students actually performing in the concert. Maya had left without argument, her face burning with humiliation. At home, her family became her support system. Her mother would time her practice sessions to make sure she took breaks and didn't injure herself. Her father researched techniques for building left-hand strength and found exercises specifically designed for one-handed playing. Even Daniel helped, sitting quietly in the corner doing his homework while she practiced, occasionally looking up to give her an encouraging thumbs up. 3 weeks before the concert, Maya finally made it through the entire piece without stopping. It wasn't perfect, far from it. There were missed notes and sections where the timing was off. But she'd done it. She'd played the whole thing. She immediately called Jennifer. "I made it through," Maya said, unable to keep the excitement out of her voice. "The whole piece. Start to finish. Maya, that's incredible. So what now? Are you going to tell Mrs. Whitmore?" Maya's excitement dimmed a little. "I don't know. What if she just says no? What if she won't even let me audition? Then we go over her head," Jennifer said firmly. "My mom knows some people on the school board. And there's Principal Chen, he's always seemed fair." Maya thought about it. The concert was only 3 weeks away. Programs were probably already printed with her name nowhere on them. Performance slots were assigned. The running order was set. Was it even possible to add someone this late? But the alternative was to do nothing. To let Mrs. Whitmore's cruelty go unchallenged, to prove the teacher right that Maya didn't belong, that some dreams weren't meant for her. "I need to try," Maya said finally. "I have to at least try." The night before the spring concert, Maya lay in bed unable to sleep. Tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow she would either achieve something incredible or face the most devastating rejection of her life. Her left hand rested on top of the blanket and she flexed her fingers unconsciously, running through the piece in her mind. She'd made her decision a week ago. She was going to show up at the concert venue early, before anyone else arrived, and request to perform. She had the sheet music to prove it was a legitimate classical piece. She had her school policy handbook that clearly stated any student enrolled in orchestra had the right to audition for performance slots, and she had her determination, which had only grown stronger with each day of practice. Her parents had wanted to come with her, to advocate for her, but Maya had asked them to wait. She needed to do this herself first. If it didn't work, if Mrs. Whitmore or the other teachers refused, then her parents could step in. But she wanted to try on her own first. She needed to prove to herself more than anyone that she had the courage to stand up for herself. The morning of the concert, Maya woke up before her alarm. She put on the navy blue dress she'd originally bought for her performance, the one she thought she'd never get to wear. She practiced the piece one more time at home, her fingers moving confidently across the keys now after weeks of intense work. Her mother hugged her tightly before she left. "No matter what happens today," her mother said, "we are so proud of you. You've worked harder than anyone should have to. You've shown more courage than most adults I know. Remember that." Maya arrived at the concert hall at 4 in the afternoon. The performance didn't start until 7, but she knew the teachers would be there early to set up. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the heavy doors and walked into the lobby. She could hear voices coming from the auditorium, people moving around, the sound of instruments being tuned. She took a deep breath and walked through the auditorium doors. The stage was a flurry of activity. Students were setting up music stands and arranging chairs. Parent volunteers were testing the sound system. And there, standing in the center of it all with her clipboard and her severe expression, was Mrs. Whitmore. Maya's courage almost failed her. Every instinct told her to turn around and leave, to avoid the confrontation, to accept her place on the sidelines. But then she thought about the last 3 weeks, the hours of practice, the aching fingers, the piece she'd mastered against all odds. She thought about Mrs. Whitmore's cruel words, about being told she wasn't good enough, about being dismissed and erased. She walked down the aisle toward the stage, her footsteps echoing in the large space. Several people turned to look at her. Mrs. Whitmore's head snapped up and her expression immediately hardened. "Miss Thompson," the teacher said coldly, "the concert doesn't start for 3 hours, and as you're not performing, there's no reason for you to be here early." Maya climbed the steps to the stage. Her legs felt shaky, but she forced herself to keep moving. "Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like to discuss my performance with you." A few students stopped what they were doing to watch. Jennifer, who was arranging sheet music nearby, looked up with wide eyes. Mrs. Whitmore's expression was pure ice. "Your performance? I believe we've already discussed this. You're not on the program. You were assigned to program design, which you've barely worked on, I might add." "I've prepared a piece," Maya said, pulling the sheet music from her bag. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "Scriabin's Prelude and Nocturne for the left hand. It's a classical piece written specifically for one-handed performance. I've been practicing for 3 weeks and I'm ready to play it." The auditorium had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red and her eyes flashed with anger. "Absolutely not. The program is set. We're not making changes the day of the concert for some stunt." "It's not a stunt," Maya said louder now. "It's a legitimate piece from the classical repertoire. And according to the school's arts participation policy, any student enrolled in orchestra has the right to audition for performance consideration." She pulled out a printed copy of the policy, one of the pages her father had helped her find and highlight. She'd done her homework. She knew her rights. Mrs. Whitmore's expression turned ugly. "I am the director of this program, Miss Thompson. I decide who performs and who doesn't. And I've already decided that you will not be making a spectacle of yourself, or this institution, with whatever little one-handed tune you think you can play." The words hit Maya like a slap, but she didn't back down. "Then you're not following the school's own policies. Policies that were put in place to ensure fair treatment for all students." "Fair treatment?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice rose. "I'll tell you what's fair. What's fair is maintaining the high standards this program is known for. What's fair is not letting students with no chance of success embarrass themselves and everyone associated with them. Now I suggest you leave before—" "Is there a problem here?" Everyone turned. Principal Chen had entered from the side door, probably drawn by the raised voices. He looked between Maya and Mrs. Whitmore, his expression concerned but calm. Mrs. Whitmore composed herself quickly. "No problem, Principal Chen. Just a student who doesn't understand that the concert program is finalized." Principal Chen walked closer, his eyes moving to the cast on Maya's arm, then to the sheet music she was holding. "Miss Thompson, isn't it? I heard about your accident. How are you healing?" "I'm doing well, sir," Maya said. Her voice was stronger now, bolstered by having someone else present. "I've been learning a piece written for the left hand, and I'd like the opportunity to audition for tonight's concert. According to school policy, I have that right." She handed him both the sheet music and the policy printout. Principal Chen looked them over carefully, his expression thoughtful. Maya could see Mrs. Whitmore's jaw tightening, her hands clenched around her clipboard. "This is highly irregular," Mrs. Whitmore said. "The day of the concert is not the time." "Actually," Principal Chen interrupted gently, "if Miss Thompson has prepared an appropriate piece and is requesting an audition as per school policy, I don't see why we can't accommodate that." He turned to Maya. "Can you play it now, so we can hear what you've prepared?" Maya's heart leaped into her throat. This was it. This was her chance. "Yes, sir. I can play it right now." Mrs. Whitmore looked like she'd swallowed something sour, but she couldn't argue with the principal. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "Let's hear this performance. Though I think we're all about to witness why policies need to be applied with discretion." Maya walked to the grand piano at the center of the stage. It was much nicer than the upright piano at home, and for a moment she felt intimidated. But then she sat down on the bench, adjusted her position, and placed her left hand on the keys. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes of Scriabin's prelude floated through the auditorium, soft and delicate. Maya's left hand moved across the keys with a confidence that surprised even her. All those weeks of practice, all those hours of pain and frustration, had built something inside her hand that she'd never had before. Strength, precision, independence. The melody began to build, her hand crossing over itself to reach the higher notes while her thumb maintained the bass line below. It was a dance, intricate and demanding, requiring her 5 fingers to do the work of 10. But Maya had learned every step, practiced every movement until it became muscle memory. She could feel people watching her, but she didn't let it distract her. She poured everything into the music. Every bit of pain from the accident. Every moment of humiliation from Mrs. Whitmore. Every hour of doubt when she thought maybe she really wasn't good enough. All of it flowed through her fingers and into the piano, transforming into something beautiful. The prelude section ended, and without pausing, Maya moved into the nocturne. This part was even more emotional, slower, and more contemplative. Her hand stretched across the keyboard, reaching for notes that seemed impossible to connect, but she'd trained for this. She'd built up the flexibility and strength to make those reaches, to hold those chords, to create harmonies that shouldn't be possible with just one hand. When she played the final chord and let it ring out into silence, Maya opened her eyes. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Jennifer started clapping, loud and enthusiastic, and suddenly other students joined in. Even some of the parent volunteers who'd stopped to listen were applauding. Principal Chen was smiling broadly. "That was remarkable, Miss Thompson. Truly remarkable." Maya looked at Mrs. Whitmore. The teacher's face was pale, her expression a mixture of shock and something else. Anger, maybe. Or perhaps disbelief that Maya had actually pulled it off. "It's adequate," Mrs. Whitmore said stiffly. "But as I mentioned, the program is already finalized. We can't simply—" "I think we can make an adjustment," Principal Chen said firmly. There was still kindness in his voice, but also authority. "This is exactly the kind of determination and excellence Winston Academy should be showcasing. Miss Thompson, you'll perform tonight. We'll add you to the program right before intermission." Maya felt tears pricking her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Mrs. Whitmore opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but Principal Chen gave her a look that said the discussion was over. The teacher turned sharply and walked away, her heels clicking angrily against the stage floor. The next few hours passed in a blur. Jennifer helped Maya run through the piece 2 more times to get comfortable with the stage piano. Other students came up to congratulate her, many of them shocked that she'd learned such a difficult piece in only 3 weeks. A few of them looked at Mrs. Whitmore differently now, like they were seeing the teacher's true character for the first time. Maya's parents arrived at 6:30, and she rushed to tell them the news. Her mother cried happy tears and hugged her carefully, mindful of the cast. Her father beamed with pride. Even Daniel was excited, though he admitted he didn't really understand what the big deal was about playing piano with one hand. "You're going to be amazing," her mother said, fixing a strand of Maya's hair. "Just remember to breathe and play from your heart." As 7 o'clock approached, the auditorium began filling with people. Maya peeked out from backstage and saw hundreds of faces, parents, students, teachers, and even some people from the local arts community, who always attended the Winston Academy spring concert. Her stomach did nervous flips. This was so much bigger than she'd imagined. The concert began with the orchestra playing a classical overture, followed by various student performances. Some were good, some were just okay. Timothy performed her original Chopin piece, and Maya had to admit he'd improved since she'd last heard him. But she still caught the rushed section in the middle, and she knew she would have played it better. Then Principal Chen walked onto the stage to make an announcement. "Before we break for intermission, we have a special addition to tonight's program. Many of you know that one of our talented pianists, Maya Thompson, was injured in a car accident several weeks ago. What you may not know is that Maya didn't let that stop her love of music. Instead, She learned a piece written specifically for the left hand, and she's going to perform it for us tonight. Please welcome Maya Thompson." The applause started before Maya even walked onto the stage. She could see her parents in the third row, her mother already dabbing at her eyes with the tissue. Jennifer was sitting with the other orchestra students, giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up. And there, in the back corner with the other teachers, was Mrs. Whitmore, her arms crossed and her face expressionless. Maya sat at the piano bench and adjusted her position. The stage lights were bright and warm on her face. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, all these people waiting to see what she would do, waiting to see if she'd succeed or fail. She placed her left hand on the keys and took one final deep breath. Then she began to play. The music that came from that piano was nothing short of magic. Every single note was crystal clear, every phrase perfectly shaped. Maya's hand moved with a grace and confidence that made it look easy, even though everyone watching knew it wasn't. She crossed octaves, played rapid runs, held impossible chord progressions, all with just 5 fingers doing the work of 10. But it wasn't just technically impressive. Maya played with emotion that came from somewhere deep inside her soul. You could hear her journey in the music, the pain of the accident, the humiliation of being dismissed and looked down on, the determination to prove everyone wrong, the joy of discovering she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. Parents in the audience leaned forward in their seats, completely captivated. Students forgot to check their phones. Even the teachers who'd seen thousands of student performances over the years watched with amazement. This wasn't just a good performance. This was something special, something rare. When Maya played the final haunting chord of the nocturne, she let it ring out for a long moment before lifting her hand from the keys. For 3 full seconds, the auditorium was completely silent. Then someone stood up. Then another person. Then another. Within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding and cheering. Maya stood and took a bow, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her parents, who were crying and clapping. She looked at Jennifer, who was jumping up and down with excitement. She looked at Principal Chen, who was applauding with genuine admiration. And then she looked at Mrs. Whitmore. The teacher was still seated while everyone around her stood. Her face was tight, her jaw clenched. But there was something in her eyes now. Maybe it was recognition that she'd been wrong. Maybe it was resentment that Maya had succeeded despite her cruelty. Maybe it was just the discomfort of being publicly proven wrong in front of hundreds of people. Maya didn't care anymore. Mrs. Whitmore's opinion no longer had power over her. Maya had proven to herself what she was capable of, and that was all that mattered. The applause seemed to go on forever. When Maya finally left the stage, she was immediately surrounded by people congratulating her. Parents she'd never met told her how inspiring she was. Younger students asked for her autograph. Even some of the other teachers came to shake her hand and praise her performance. Jennifer pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Maya. "You did it!" "I knew you would. That was incredible." "I can't believe it's over," Maya said, feeling almost dizzy with relief and joy. "I actually did it." "You didn't just do it," Jennifer said. "You were the best performance of the whole night. Everyone's talking about it, and people were talking about it." By the next morning, the video of Maya's performance had been posted online by several parents who'd recorded it. By Monday, it had thousands of views. By Wednesday, it had gone viral, with hundreds of thousands of people watching and sharing this 12-year-old girl who'd overcome injury and discrimination to play beautiful music with one hand. News outlets picked up the story. Maya was invited to appear on local television programs. A renowned piano professor from a prestigious music academy reached out to offer her a scholarship to their summer intensive program. Messages poured in from around the world, from other young musicians, from people who'd overcome their own challenges, from parents who wanted their children to see what determination looked like, but perhaps the most significant change happened at Winston Academy itself. Mrs. Whitmore submitted her retirement paperwork 2 weeks after the concert. The official reason was that she wanted to pursue other interests, but everyone knew the truth. Principal Chen had made it clear that discrimination of any kind wouldn't be tolerated, and several other students had come forward with their own stories after seeing Maya's courage. The music program got a new director, a younger teacher named Mr. Rodriguez, who believed that music was for everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances. The whole culture of the department began to shift, becoming more inclusive and encouraging. As for Maya, her arm eventually healed completely. By the summer, the cast came off, and she regained full use of both hands. But she never forgot what she'd learned during those weeks of playing with just her left hand. She'd discovered a strength inside herself that had nothing to do with how many hands she could use. She'd learned that the biggest obstacles aren't physical. They're the people who try to make you believe you're not good enough. And she'd learned that sometimes, when someone tries to break your spirit, the best response is to prove them wrong in the most beautiful way possible. Maya went on to perform at many more concerts, always with both hands now. But she kept the sheet music for Scriabin's Prelude and Nocturne for the left hand in a frame on her bedroom wall. It reminded her of the night she stopped letting other people define what she was capable of, the night she inspired everyone by refusing to give up on her dreams.